This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today, as a special guest to talk about one of the Canadian wrestling legends that we lost recently, is none other than the youngest Hart sibling, the youngest brother of Bret Hart, the youngest son of Stu Hart. He helped out behind the scenes in Stampede for years. He wrestled for WWE many times as a superstar's enhancement talent. He also wrestled for Stampede Wrestling. He was a trainer. He had a hand in training me for wrestling. None other than Ross Hart. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Great, Devin. You're way too generous in your accolades, but I appreciate the compliments, and it's a pleasure to be on your show again.
And you're back from Vancouver and Washington, and I know you went on a big trip.
Yeah.
I hope that went well for you.
It went well. A lot of driving, but it was nice. I had a lot of interest in Seattle and Portland because they were big wrestling circuits back in the 70s and 80s. And I just sort of had a fascination about visiting them and even looking up some historians there, like Jim Valley and Frank Cuthbert, and it was great to see them. And they had a lot of knowledge about the Portland wrestling promotion and different independents that have gone through Washington and Oregon since then. So it was a really neat trip.
And of course, Stampede at one point went all the way to Vancouver back when I believe you guys had Brian Adams' manager helping you out.
Yeah, Bruce Allen, when he was co-promoting with us in 1983, 84, we had some really big shows in Vancouver and the island. And my dad actually, as far back as the early to late 50s, was running shows in Seattle, Spokane, even as far as Salt Lake City. That was just how big a territory he had. And back then, all the travel was done by car. So it was just amazing. My dad's promotion spanned all over Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Washington, and parts of central BC.
Yeah, before we get into Leo, I was just thinking, because WWE is doing Survivor Series in Vancouver. I think AEW had their biggest TV taping Canadian crowd in Vancouver recently, and WWE has had a bunch of sellouts there. What is it about Vancouver that's so hot for wrestling now? Because has it always been like that, or is this a new thing?
Hard to say. I think they're big into sports. The Canucks are a pretty strong NHL team, and they went to the second round of the playoffs and took the Oilers to 7 games. But I think people there are just into concerts and pop culture and wrestling. And but I think WWE has a pretty high wave right now. They've been selling out pretty much everywhere with Raw and SmackDown tapings, and they're coming here in the fall to Calgary for Raw, and I think a SmackDown taping in Edmonton, and I think their attendances will be pretty big. So right now they're just on a high wave, and I think it extends all over Canada, and they've been drawing very well places like Vancouver and Winnipeg. So I think it's just a trend for WWE right now. They're pretty hot, and they've got some big stars and some pretty good angles and programs.
And hopefully we'll see Natalya back in there soon, because it came out in the news a few weeks ago she had re-signed a pretty good contract, so that was great to hear.
Yeah, and I think it's a win-win situation for her and WWE. She's been there longer than any of the women there, and she's got a lot of stability, a lot of credibility. She's had consistently good matches, and I think she offers a lot, even though she's been there a while, and she has a new look. She's lost some weight, and she's really lean, and she's in great shape. She's overcome some injuries, and I think for her, it was a fairly easy choice to resign with WWE, and they certainly did offer her more money. But I hope they'll use her better. They'll put her in some more meaningful matches and programs. And I think they can rebuild her to be a pretty big star. And I think she can hold her own even against the competition there, because the women's division is probably more competitive now than ever. But, I think Natalya can hold her own against any of them. And I think she'll have a pretty good run there.
Were you invited to the Owen Hart Cup final in Calgary a couple weeks ago?
I was, and I was able to only attend the last part of it. I was actually working at the Stampede in another capacity, another job. So I was given a ticket actually by my sister-in-law, Martha, Owen's widow. So she gave tickets to my brother Bruce and I and a few friends of ours. So I unfortunately didn't have a chance to see the AEW section of the show by the time I got there. Most of it was over, but I'm really honored that they're honoring Owen with this title. I think it's been very well done, and it's great that they had the finals in Calgary, where Owen was from, and I think it's a great way to honor his name and legacy. And I'm not sure actually who won the finals, who actually won the tournament. I'm a little bit behind. Brian Danielson. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, I couldn't think of a better winner than him. He's over very strong. He's such a good competitor, and I know Owen would have loved his work. So I'm glad to see somebody like him or Will Ospreay could have won it. So I think it's great that they're honoring Owen, and it's something that Martha, my sister-in-law, can stand behind. As opposed to WWE honoring Owen in their own way, which she wouldn't be a part of, understandably, but she's been very supportive of AEW's recognition of Owen, and I think it's great that they're going to have an annual tournament, every year, in his name.
And it's paying respect to your father in a way, because your big event was always on Stampede week, and they seem to be coming here for the finals of the Owen Hart tournament during Stampede week every year.
Yeah, it's the second year that they've come during the Stampede. Their attendance wasn't as good this year, but I think it was a pretty good show, though. I think this year actually was a better show. It was more well-received, and more of their top guys were performing, from what I understand. So I think that's great if AEW comes annually every year, and they have the finals of the tournament as part of the Stampede. So I think that's great. For some reason, WWE hasn't pursued Stampede dates. They typically come sometimes in August or September. Maybe that's their scheduling. It's kind of hard to believe they've never scheduled a Stampede show since 1997. And, it's almost 30 years ago. And they could draw a tremendous crowd if they ran a pay-per-view or, even a TV taping, if it, because during the Stampede they could run, on a Monday or a Tuesday night for a Raw or SmackDown show. But for some reason, WWE's kind of passed up on Stampede shows here, where they would have so many traditional wrestling fans and tourists to draw from. But AEW's capitalized on that.
And it's strange, because that Canadian Stampede event that you were in the ring at the end of, that's gone down in history as one of the hottest crowds ever for WWE, and they never ever tried to recreate it, not even one time.
No, and even if they just had some kind of a Canadian theme behind the show, or if they honored Brett maybe, or if they had an anniversary show, maybe they could do something like that in 2027, maybe a 30th anniversary of the Canadian Stampede show, although a lot of those wrestlers sadly have passed away. But they could do something to commemorate that. And I think a lot of fans who went to that show in Stampede of 97 would be very excited, to come to that, and relive those memories, because it was an incredible show. I'd never seen an atmosphere like that for any WWE show in Calgary.
I gotta ask you, Ricky Starks was the winner of the Owen Hart Cup last year. He hasn't been on AEW TV for a long time now. apparently he's turned down an angle or something, and they're just going to sit him out the rest of his contract, from what I understand. But there was a rumor going on that after he won the Owen Hart Cup last year, something happened at some bar with him in Calgary that may have got him in some hot water with the AEW.
Yeah, I heard some rumors about that, but I didn't get any details. I heard he had some kind of an altercation after the match. I guess that would have been a year ago, during the Stampede here, but it was kept pretty quiet, never really hit the media or anything. But it's interesting though that he's not wrestling right now because he was getting a pretty good push. He was one of their featured stars, so I don't know if he's in the doghouse and that they've just put him on the sidelines, or if he's not renewing his contract. I'm kind of puzzled to see what his status is and if he's going to be back with the company. But it's kind of ironic, that he did so well, and I think he won the tournament last year, and then this year he's not even featured. So
it's strange with AEW, like with Rusev. Apparently he's gone back to Bulgaria, but he's still under contract with some people. They won't release them, but they'll still keep paying them, which is great for the wrestlers, but that wouldn't have happened in the old days.
No, and Jake, or Jack Swagger, I'm not sure what his name.
He's had out for a long time too.
Yeah, I think he's still under contract, but they're not using him at all. So that to me just seems kind of a waste of talent. These guys are available. They had a lot of name recognition. Jake whatever his last name is, but yeah, Hagar. Yeah. And he was over with WWE, and I think Rusev was too. And it's kind of odd they're not even using them, but they're paying them, and it seems to be a waste of money and talent. But
even Jeff Hardy, his last 3 months, they didn't even use him.
No,
they could have put him over. Like they could have used him to enhance younger talent for some reason, but they'd rather just have him sit at home.
Yeah, and he has name value. He's had some personal demons, Jeff, but he's a great performer. Every time he's out there, he has fantastic matches, and he really puts out. It's just a shame that he's had problems with substances and kind of a chaotic lifestyle. But he's definitely over, and he'd be an asset to any promotion, whether it's TNA or Ring of Honor or AEW, or not likely WWE would he go back there, but he would still be over there too. He was just a phenomenal performer, Jeff.
Supposedly they met with WWE over SummerSlam weekend, so I guess you could never say never. But
no, was that Jeff and Matt, or?
Yeah, Jeff and Matt.
Well, they would spice up the tag team division pretty quickly, I think, in WWE. So it wouldn't take much to reestablish them. Shoot some hot angle, and they still do all the hardcore stuff. And I think they'll be an asset anywhere they go. But it's just kind of odd. AEW is not exploiting some of the talent they've had, and they could be, so.
Yeah, Jake Roberts, they re-signed back in March, and we haven't seen him do anything.
No, I know they signed Thomas Billington, Dynamite's nephew, and I'm not sure what plans they have for him. It looks like he's going to wrestle sole because his brother Mark is still injured, still has a shoulder injury, but I hope Thomas does well. I think he's got a great following and a look very much like his uncle Tom, and so I hope he does well. He could definitely do well in a cruiserweight division. But I think it was a good signing for him, and he'll get some decent exposure with AEW.
Yes, I've actually seen his matches that he's had there so far. I didn't realize he's signed yet, but I assume that if they hadn't signed him, they were going to, because they were having him lose, but they were making him still appear strong.
Yeah. So I hope he has a great future. He has a great work ethic. He works hard in the ring, and on the dungeon shows I saw him performing in Calgary. he was having consistently good matches, and the crowd loved him. So I hope AEW takes to him as well, and they can kind of capitalize on his name value as Dynamite's nephew. I think he would definitely be an asset on that Wembley show they have if they feature him even on the undercard. So
Harry would have too, but I guess he's been All Japan now.
Yeah. So I think if AEW had maybe reached out to Harry, just as a freelance agent, he could have maybe worked on the Wembley show, but I'm not sure, if they really sought him or not. So he's going to be in Japan for about 5 months. I think he'll come home for a couple of short intervals and then return to Japan. But I think he's very happy there. The company's taking good care of him. They're looking after him, and he likes their style. And I think he's got a good future with them. But he definitely, I think, would have been a drawing power on the AWE show because, there's so much legacy as Davey Boy's son. And I think if they had approached him, there wouldn't have been any conflict, unless it conflicted with his dates with Japan. But he's basically a free agent just with MLW, and he probably could have been available to work on the Wembley show. And I think, he would have had a lot of box office, even in a undercard singles match or something. But, I think it was an opportunity AEW didn't capitalize on.
He would have got a great pop, that's for sure. Everyone remembers his father's greatest match from the old Wembley series.
Yeah, absolutely. The classic Davey had with Brett at SummerSlam in Wembley, and there's so much history there, and if Harry or Davey Jr. or whatever they call him was featured, I think it would just bring back so many of those memories for fans of that classic match his dad had with Brett.
Here's a picture I just took off your Facebook. Speaking of that match, Diana looking as lovely as ever with you. I believe that's Jerry Morrow, Champagne Jerry Morrow to your right, to the left, Gamma Singh, the original Gamma Singh, Bret Hart, your brother, and Abu Weasal, former Stampede manager.
Yeah, so that photo was taken at Leo Burke's service just 2 days ago on Saturday. I think that was the 3rd of August, or maybe it was the 2nd of August, but no, I think the 3rd of August. But it was great to see them there. Some of the Stampede alumni. These are all guys that Leo wrestled with or influenced or inspired in different ways.
So as far as Leo Burke, I know you're younger than him. What was your first connection with meeting Leo Burke? Was that him coming to the house to work for your dad? Was it seeing him on TV?
It's my first recollection, Hannibal, was of Leo wrestling in the fall of 1966 for my dad on a Stampede card. And he was actually wrestling under Batman mask. He was wearing a whole Batman mask and the outfit. I think it was largely because the Beast and Rudy K, his brothers were working on top his heels for Stampede at that time. Leo was a baby face, so they kind of kayfabed his identity as one of the Cormiers. So he wrestled just under the Batman mask, but he was really too green to be under a mask, and he wasn't very big. He was probably 180 pounds at the time. But I remember watching him wrestle, and I could just see a lot of speed and agility and athleticism and a lot of heart. Like Leo just always had fire. He always sold well. He always made great comebacks. And I could just see, as a 7-year-old that was watching him in action, that he was going to be a really good performer. And that was my first recollection of him. And then I think after about 3 weeks, the mask really wasn't getting over the Batman gimmick. It was almost like fans were mocking him for wearing it. So I think even back then, fans could be cynical about someone trying to wear a Batman or a Robin outfit. So he kind of gave that up and then just started wrestling as Leo Burke, as an underneath babyface. But he he was such a hardworking performer, and the fans loved him, and even though he didn't win too many matches in his first year, he was very green. He just had so much fire, he could throw really good drop kicks and arm drags, and he was well taught. He was a guy that advanced very quickly. I think he was very well taught by his older brothers, Yvonne, who's the Beast, and Rudy, and we kind of just kept his identity separate, so he really wasn't known as one of the Cormiers. Wasn't until a year later when there was a angle done with Archie the Stomper Goldie and the Beast, where Archie stomped out Leo's brother Bobby, who was wrestling and refereeing as Norton Jackson, and my dad said, let's kind of shoot a real angle here where the Beast comes to his younger brother's rescue. Archie really did a number on him. I think it was sort of a situation where Archie was brawling with somebody and kicking the hell out of everybody, and Norton Jackson, who was Leo's brother Bobby, came running into the ring as one of the baby faces, and Archie put the boots to him, and I think he even got color, and then to a few other baby faces that tried to come in, and then the Beast all of a sudden came running in the ring, and he was a heel and had tag teamed with Archie a couple of times. Then all of a sudden he went after the Stomper, and the fans were kind of going crazy. Why is the Beast attacking the Stomper? They're both heels. And then the Beast did this very passionate interview and saying, I'm going to reveal something to the fans that I've never ever shared before, but we're all part of a wrestling family. The Cormiers, I think there's like 7 brothers, and Rudy K is actually my brother, and Leo Burke and Norton Jackson are my younger brothers. And what the Stomper did here was reprehensible, and I'm going to settle the score with him. And so the Beast and Stomper worked about a 2-month program. It was kind of a clash of the titans between two really dominant heels and brawlers. But so it was kind of this kayfabe covering up of who the Burkes were, and that they were all part of one family, was just kind of unleashed. And so everybody knew they were part of one family. And so it was kind of interesting, but it didn't seem to matter with Leo, though. He had a style of his own, and he came the most consistently out of all the Burkes. He toured Calgary the most. He married a Calgary girl, and I think he just liked the style and territory, and he liked working for my dad. So over the years, he came back the most consistently, although the Beast and Rudy and Bobby had some pretty good runs here throughout, but Leo was here pretty consistently from 1966 right to the late 80s, I think, till about 1989. So Calgary was kind of his home territory, as well as the Maritimes, where he was a superstar.
What was the school that he had at Brett's house?
Well, I know Brett was kind of training guys for the WWF at that time. Brett had a ring set up in his house in Dalhousie in the northwest part of the city. Brett had a really big house, and then I think WWF was interested in somebody training Edge and Christian and Mark Henry and guys that were just breaking in, and Brett recommended Leo. Brett said he's a really good teacher and knows so much about timing and psychology. So he trained these guys, and I think a few others as well, but those were the most prominent ones, though, Edge and Christian and Mark Henry. I'm not sure. There's a few others as well. Test might have been training there as well, but
wasn't Ken Shamrock maybe for a short period?
Yeah, Ken Shamrock was training there for a short period, and a few others, So Brett highly endorsed Leo as a trainer and a teacher, and and you can see the results there. All those guys became pretty great workers, and they owed a lot to Leo, because he just taught them the real fundamentals, right? He taught them how to lock up, how to take bumps, how to go into the ropes, right? How to go into the turnbuckles, not to hurt each other. Leo was always very safe but believable performer. You know, he was just an excellent technician, and so it was a pretty successful training camp though that he ran there. And then I think even when Brett left WWE and went to WCW, he brought Leo with him as a trainer there. And I don't think that lasted as long, but it just seemed that the bigger promotions knew very well of his reputation and his legacy, and welcomed the opportunity for him to teach the younger guys how to break in.
Were the people that Leo was training during the WCW days, I know Greg Pollock was one of them, from what I understand, did they have like developmental contracts, or were they just basically going there and training in hopes of getting signed at one point?
I think some of them, I think most of them were like developmental contracts. You know, there's another one, a guy named Glenn Kulka. He was a football player in the CFL, and I think he was under a developmental contract. So I think all of them were kind of under a developmental contract as long before they had NXT, or it's even, I think, before they established Ohio Valley and some of those other training sites, you know, where they used Danny Davis and Rip Rogers. And I think before they even had Steve Kern and Dr. Tom Pritchard as teachers, Leo was doing that in an earlier role. But you know, these were guys that really hadn't been in the ring before, except Ken Shamrock. I think Ken just came to get a little better schooling. You know, he was doing more of the UFC style, you know, kind of the ultimate fighting style, but he wanted to learn more about the basics. And so, you know, he kind of upgraded, I guess, you know, by training with Leo. But he was sort of the only exception of someone who was already established, but everyone else was just kind of breaking in and learning the ropes from Leo.
Do you have any favorite matches from the Stampede days that Leo was involved with?
Oh, so many. He had some really classic rivalries, some really good programs, you know, that just drew Stampede so much money. But he had a really good program with Don Gagne, who was also Frenchie Martin in Montreal, and then wrestled and managed in the WWF. I think he managed Dino Bravo. But they had a really good rivalry in the late 70s. And he had a really good one with Dr. D, David Schultz. I remember they had what was kind of called the First Blood match. And the stipulation of the match was that whoever could soak up a handkerchief with the other's blood, you know, completely, you know, until it was blood soaked, would win the match. And, you know, it was kind of hardcore, you know, but it sold out, you know, and people were just so intrigued, right? Leo was, more of a traditional wrestler, but when it got to a certain stage where they couldn't stay inside the ring, or they couldn't keep other wrestlers from interfering, then, then they would have like a coal miner's glove match, right? Or they would have a cage match, or a tape fist match, you know. And so in that case, Leo could really brawl then. You know, he had just some legendary matches: Archie the Stomper Goldie, Killer Brooks, Killer Carl Krupp, David Schultz, Duke Myers, and Kerry Brown. And they did an angle where Schultz and Leo had been feuding, you know, had been arch rivals for some time. And Schultz was part of J.R. Foley's army with Kerry Brown and Duke Myers. And then they double crossed Schultz and turned on him. And he became a reluctant babyface. And I say that kind of literal, because Schultz didn't want to turn babyface, but we just saw it as a really good angle, you know, where he actually pairs with Leo as arch rival to get even with Brown and Schultz. And he kind of begrudgingly went through the angle, and it got over like crazy. And we sold out all over Western Canada for about 3 months with that. You know, it's just a really big angle, you know, where these two arch rivals put their differences aside and were feuding with Foley's army. So, yeah, you know, he had some great matches with Brett. Most of his matches with Brett were babyface matches, and just some real classic matches. Leo would, try to use the sleeper on Brett, and Brett was kind of the younger, less experienced underdog, but and I think more fans are cheering for Brett just because he was maybe more local, from Calgary, where Leo was from New Brunswick. And in the first few matches they had some really classic matches. Went to 60-minute draws, and then Leo's experience kind of prevailed. And I remember he wrestled Brett in a final match of a series, and he put Brett out with the sleeper, and the crowd was just kind of silent and stunned, but it looked like such a real struggle. It was so believable, and it actually made Brett even better. It looked like he came that close to beating Leo, and it took all Leo could, to wear him out at the end, and then Leo was still a babyface. People still loved him as such. And then about 6 months later, he actually dropped the belt to Brett, and he was leaving for the Maritimes, and which was always good about Leo. Whenever he was leaving the territory, he had no problems about putting somebody over and establishing them and getting them over. And he was very unselfish about that. But and we can't overlook how big a star he was in New Brunswick, PEI, Nova Scotia, the Maritimes. He was a huge star. The Cormiers were a really big family there. They were kind of probably the first and biggest family of wrestling in the Maritimes. But definitely Leo, I think, was the top star. He was considered the very best of his family there. But it was a great situation. He would wrestle in the Maritimes in the spring and summer, and then they would close. They were kind of a seasonal territory. They only ran from about April till October, and then he would wrestle for Stampede in the winter. So that's why Leo didn't go to a lot of territories. He focused mostly on Stampede wrestling in the West, and then the Maritimes in the East. But he married a Calgary girl and raised his kids here, and he didn't travel that much, but when he did, he did very well. Like, he had some good runs in Amarillo with the Funks. He worked in Kansas City, where he was very much influenced by Pat O'Connor and learned a lot from Pat O'Connor in the late 60s, and then had a pretty good run in the Carolinas, working with Johnny Weaver as well. So, but Leo is just a tremendous worker, and he worked heel as well, but I always thought he was a better babyface. He was just a more natural, good seller, and had incredible timing and fire on his comebacks, and and the people really got behind him. And I didn't see him as a good natural heel. He didn't seem, even though methodically he was a good performer and he could sell and take bumps like crazy. But after we'd seen him for so many years, as a very clean cut baby face, he almost really didn't get over as a heel. Like, the people didn't want to see him as a heel, and some guys are able to switch from heel to baby face, like Dynamite Kid and a few others. But Leo, he was always better received as a baby face.
Yeah, it seems the couple of times I met him, his more natural personality would have been a baby face as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but yeah, he's just a classic performer, and he held the North American heavyweight title, which was our biggest singles title, I think, 10 times, which was, I think, a record only to Archie the Stomper Goldie, who might have had maybe about 10 times. And then he held the international tag team title on at least 6 occasions, with his brother Bobby, my brother Keith, Brett one time, and Ron Ritchie as well. So he was tremendous in tag teams, and really good with his brother Bobby, and then Hubert Gallant, who was sort of his protege. Leo and Hubert patterned his style much like Leo. He was almost like a second generation Leo Burke. If you ever saw Hubert wrestling, he patterned his style so much like Leo, and they were a very good tag team as well. But Leo was just a tremendous performer and a class guy. He was just great in the dressing rooms. He was always a good influence on other wrestlers, very quiet, kept to himself, never complained about who he was working with or his payoffs or anything like that. He was a consummate professional and a great role model and leader in the dressing room.
How would the payoffs have compared from Calgary to the Maritimes? Would it have been similar pay?
I think pretty similar pay. I know the Maritimes, they ran like 7 days a week. They ran like every day. I think because they were a seasonal promotion, they ran sometimes 8 shows a week. Quite often on weekends, like on Saturdays or Sundays, they would do double shows. So I think the pay might have been a little better just because guys were working more shots there, but guys didn't get a day off either. But on the plus side there, they had shorter road trips. They were wrestling all over PEI, New Brunswick, and Halifax, Nova Scotia. Whereas in the Stampede circuit, they're pretty long road trips all the way from Calgary and all of Alberta and Saskatchewan and Montana and the Northwest Territories, parts of BC. So I think longer travel here is on the Stampede circuit, but I think the pay was pretty comparable. And I think promoters were kind of aware, like my dad and Emile Dupre, who was largely promoting with Cormier's working for him. But I think promoters were kind of aware of what the wrestlers were making in the other territories. So, they had to be competitive and offer them at least, a similar salary or something pretty comparable. Otherwise, the word would get out, and those wrestlers wouldn't come. So, they would kind of use that as a bargaining tool. And, some would say to my dad, well, I was making more than that, Stu, when I worked for Emile Dupre, and then I think some told Emile the same thing. I was making more for Stu when I was working there. So, the promoters had to kind of decide, was the wrestler really worth it or not? And, if it was a top star, someone who's going to draw you money, you usually conceded and paid them because those guys would make you money.
For the undercard guys, was it mostly just off the house, or would you have to give them guarantees as well?
I think my dad gave guarantees to almost all the wrestlers. Some of the guys who were just breaking in and starting out maybe weren't getting guarantees, and some of them were only working part-time. But for the most part, my dad always paid guarantees, even to the undercard guys. And then obviously the main eventers, guys who had titles or were working in the main events got bigger guarantees. But as a rule, most wrestlers knew what they could get every week, and if they worked a Sunday show, in Calgary, they would get extra pay for that as well, whereas in the Maritimes, you got your guarantee whether you wrestled 7 shows a week or you wrestled 8 times a week. So, I think that was the only complaint that a lot of wrestlers made, is that they never had any days off, and they kind of felt burnt out because they were wrestling at least 7, sometimes 8 times a week. But again, it was a seasonal territory, and there wasn't much else in the Maritimes other than hockey, right? They didn't have football or baseball or anything else. So wrestling was a really big draw there. Once they got TV established there, they were getting big crowds, especially in the hockey arenas. So they ran as often as they could. And, I know Emile Dupre was criticized a lot for not paying guys above and beyond what their guarantees were, but he was a person of his word. Like, he did pay wrestlers what he promised, like he did give them their guarantees, but he made them work for it too. So, but I know there are a few that who were at odds with him. I think David Schultz basically finally just quit and just said, "Well, I'm you're making all this money, and we can see what the houses are, and you're refusing to pay me more than my guarantee, and you're making all this money." So he left, and then he actually came and started for my dad. So I know my dad had to have paid David Schultz what he was making, at least in the Maritimes, probably a little bit more, and he was making big money when he came here, but he was a big box office for us as well, though, David. So I think guys made money, in both promotions, but had to work very hard for it.
The bad part of being a promoter, as I've learned over the years, and thank you for helping break me into promoters, is when the houses are bad, they still want their guarantees no matter what. But if the houses are good, they want extra.
They want a bigger piece of the pie for sure. And yeah, yet sometimes wrestlers don't understand the lean times when you're actually losing money, and they expect to be paid in full then, and nothing less. But when the gates are bigger and the promoters may be recouping their losses, right? They expect to be compensated better for it. So, I think it has to be a bit more of a two-way street, but the real blessing for a lot of guys then was that they got to work 6-7 nights a week, and that's how they learned, right? And unfortunately guys don't get that opportunity now. So many wrestlers are lucky if they wrestle once, maybe twice a week, sometimes even a few times a month, just because there's very few independents that are running that often. And there aren't a lot of arenas that will even feature wrestling shows. Back in the 70s and 80s, we could run shows in the high schools and the recreation centers, the community centers, the reserves. Now, with all the liability restrictions and just I think a lot of principals and coaches that kind of turned off on pro wrestling, and maybe the controversial storylines and some of the negative role models. It's very hard to work with any sponsors, like we could then, and back then, the real benefit, those wrestlers could work steadily, make decent money, get the opportunity to work elsewhere, like Germany or Japan or, places like South Africa or Mexico, and get steady work, and get that experience, which is really tough for a lot of young wrestlers today.
And I notice even in the newer arenas now, or when they remodel the old ones up until about 2000 would all be built in with a light at center ice.
Yeah.
For wrestling or boxing. They don't even do that anymore. It's either you have all the lights on or all off, or you got to pay $5,000 to rent a lighting grid. So people don't want to go see a show as much unless it's comparable to WWE, which costs a lot. And now that AEW is around, wrestlers want a lot more to work indies than they used to, as you probably know. Like they want thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and even to bring in some independents, guys that or maybe independent contractors or formerly worked for WWE or AEW, they want a lot of money. They want probably $1,000 US a night, and their airfare and their hotel covered. And the worst part of that is that they come in and beat your top guy or don't put your stars over. They're the only one that's really benefiting from it. And these poor promoters, that bring in these really big names, they might attract 50 or 60 more people, but by the time you paid all your expenses and costs for advertising and maybe even to run a bigger arena, you've actually lost more money. So I think that the real key is to establish your own stars. Get your own guys over, and then occasionally, bring in a big name, with the intent that they can at least enhance your stars or maybe put them over, and give your stars and your title some credibility.
It's too bad all these companies weren't around in the prime of yours and Bruce's wrestling school, because you guys could have really had something going. But sadly, during that time, like WCW was closing, ECW was gone, the territories were fading. You still created a lot of people that ended up making WWE. But imagine if AEW had been around, you would have been a great feeder system, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just the timing, was just not quite there, and we had so many really good stars, and then but the doors were kind of closed with WWE, especially after the lawsuit, after my brother Owen's death, and they didn't really want to risk doing anything interactive with the Stampede promotion because of the backlash they were going to get over the lawsuit with Martha and and Brett, who's very anti WWE at that time, and even Japan, right? They haven't booked as many foreigners, in the last 20, 30 years, and especially after the COVID period, they're not bringing in as many foreigners, but I think they're business is really down because they're using so many Japanese against Japanese, and people want to see more foreigners, and so but I think during that Stampede resurrection, from about 99 to 2004, if we had the opportunity to work interactively with a few other promotions, it would have been great. I think we just kind of missed that timing by a few years.
But you definitely, I would say the top people you created is TJ, who's a great agent for WWE. Natty, legendary women's wrestler. Harry's had a great career, and Jinder Mahal was WWE champion. He was around.
Yeah, absolutely, and
still did pretty good overall.
Yeah, my nephew Ted had a few spurts, he got some notoriety. It's just unfortunately he's had some legal and personal problems, but he was a very talented performer, and he learned here in Calgary, and and there's a few others, that did quite well and worked in places like Germany and Japan and Mexico and South Africa. But I was really happy to see Harry and TJ and Natty all do very well, each on their own, and I think they've, they've been great standouts. They did learn a lot, I think, from Bruce and I, but they also trained somewhat with Joe Daigo, Tokyo Joe, who was a very good teacher. He was kind of a hard driving slave driver at times, but he pushed guys very hard, and he had a really hard work ethic. But Harry and TJ, they learned so much from him, and I think they learned a lot about conditioning and psychology from him. But then they learned the real basics from the dungeon, working with Bruce and I, and so it was kind of a best of two worlds there, where they learned the Japanese style from Joe Daigo, and they learned the Western style from Bruce and I.
Someone wants to know if you remember anything about the match between Leo and Nick Bockwinkel, who was a great guy. I've met him a bunch of times before he.
Leo faced a lot of the world champions. With Stampede, he's usually the North American champion. As I said, I think he held the North American title 8 times, so automatically he qualified to wrestle the world champion. So he fought Nick Bockwinkel, I think, in about April of 1983, and Leo was a heel actually at that time. And it sold out Calgary and Edmonton. It's kind of interesting, kind of a heel versus heel match there. And then Leo had some really good world title matches with Harley Race, I think in 1978 and 1980. He was, babyface obviously in those, but, Leo was, just such a high caliber performer. So, if he was in a world title match, it meant something because he was kind of the cream of the crop. He held the North American title so many times, so it was only natural that he would, earn a title shot at someone like Harley Race or the Funks or Nick Bockwinkel. But that was a good match in April of '83 that Leo had with Bockwinkel, and Nick was just a great performer as well. The classic heel, and he had so much endurance and tenacity. Nick could go 50, 60 minutes, and was a really good performer as well.
Ivan's Leo Burke had a good run in Puerto Rico at the end of his career. He even beat Carlos Colon for the Universal title.
Yeah, I think he beat Carlos for a couple of titles. I know he beat him for the Universal title, which was one of the big ones in Puerto Rico. And then there was another one he actually beat Carlos for as well. So I think Leo went there kind of in the later stages of his career, around 1989, maybe 1990. And he had a good run there. I think he was so respected and well thought of, even though, he was, I wouldn't say he was past his prime there, but, he was well into his 40s at that stage. it was probably slowing down a little bit, but I think in a place like Puerto Rico, he could definitely get over as a heel because he had never been there as a babyface. Whereas in Canada, he'd been a babyface. He was sort of like Gordie Howe or Wayne Gretzky from hockey. People loved him so much you couldn't make Leo a heel. Just people didn't buy him as such. But in Puerto Rico, he was a good heel there. And Leo could work very well as a heel. Just that fans who knew him wouldn't accept him as such. But when he was in Puerto Rico, I think he got over as such because he had never been there as a babyface before, and I think it was good. Leo had one good last run, in a territory like Puerto Rico, and probably made some good money there. And it was a place where they were really desperate for American and Canadian workers after the Bruiser Brody murder in 1988. A lot of guys wouldn't work in Puerto Rico, and I think Leo probably was apprehensive about it. I think a lot of guys didn't want to work there because of that, but again, I think it was a money-making opportunity. And Stampede had closed, I think, at that time, and the Maritimes was only seasonal, so he went there and he did very well. I think he worked a couple of years in Puerto Rico, and he had quite a few tours of Japan as well, and did very well in New Zealand as well. So Leo was truly an international star, who was at the main event level everywhere he went. It's just how good a performer he was.
When did the Maritimes stop running these 8-day or 8-show a week schedules? I know they brought it back around the time that Renee was getting into the business specifically to give Renee experience.
Yeah. I think by about 91, business had dropped off everywhere, and like WWE had pretty much swallowed up all the small promotions, and I don't think Emile Dupre was running that many shows. I think he probably lasted maybe a year after Stampede had, and I'm not sure how good his TV exposure was at that time, but I think by about 1990 or so, they weren't running more than 4 or 5 nights a week. And I think WWE was over so strong on TV, fans were kind of tuning out the local Maritimes wrestling, just as they did in Stampede and All-Star Wrestling in Vancouver. It was just too hard to compete with the big names and the high TV production value of the WWE. So I think, Emile Dupre ran the Maritimes for quite a few years, to launch Rene, his son, but I don't think he was running that many shows, not a full circuit after 1990 or so. And it was an interesting story. The Cormiers actually had their own promotion, and they were running the Maritimes from, I think, about 1969 to about 1977, and they were the established promotion there, and Emile Dupre was just running smaller cards, and they were working with a guy named Al Zink. He was sort of a business partner who had put up some money, and I think the Cormiers had put up money. I think they kind of each put up about half the money to start the promotion and buy rings, and they were running and doing great business, but again, they were only running seasonally, in the spring and summer. And then they had a big falling out in 1977, I think, where the Cormiers tried to buy out Al Zink or force him out because they didn't feel he was contributing enough to the promotion, and was not a real promoter, was not a wrestler himself, and maybe taking too much credit for the success, and how much money they were making. So they basically tried to force him out, and they ended up running in opposition to each other, the Cormiers against Al Zink, and then some guys were loyal to Al Zink and stayed with him, and then others who were more loyal to the Cormiers wrestled for them, and they ended up kind of killing each other off. They ran in opposition to each other, and Emile Dupre was just kind of in the background running his smaller promotion. I don't think he had TV or anything. And in 1 year, one season, both Al Zink and the Cormiers had put themselves out of business. They paid high price guarantees, to bring in guys to kind of win the promotional war. And each one kind of went bankrupt, and then Emile Dupre just kind of took over. And Emile had made a lot of money from real estate, owned a lot of apartment blocks in New Brunswick, and then he kind of just picked up the pieces, that the other two warring factions had left behind, and he established his own promotion, and was the only promotion there. He's pretty much untouched, until the mid '90s, I guess. Whenever he stopped running, he might even run a little bit. He might have even run in the early 2000s, but by that time it was a pretty small circuit, and he probably didn't have TV coverage. But it was kind of unfortunate what happened with the Cormiers, because they had a very successful wrestling empire, and then because of this promotional war, they lost everything. And they continued to work for Emile Dupre after that. And Emile was smart enough to use them as his big stars, and they never tried to run opposition or to take control of the promotion again, although I think they could have if they had tried. But I think they were principled, and they just thought that would be kind of unprofessional to run opposition to Emile, but I think deep in their hearts they really regretted that they lost, that empire, that big promotion, and didn't have it any longer. So, but
which is the company that J.J. Dillon booked up in the Maritimes that ended up going out of business? Was that for the Cormiers?
I think J.J. Well, he had worked for the Cormiers for a number of years, but I believe he actually was working for Al's Inc. I'm pretty sure he was. I could be wrong on that, but I think JJ was actually working for Al's Inc., which was kind of surprising because he had been very loyal to the Cormiers, when they had been running. But I think it was a case of, whoever offered these guys the most money, so guys like Archie the Stomper Goldie, Mark Lewin, some pretty big names were kind of working on both sides. John Quinn was another, and all of them were getting really big guarantees to try and tip the scales in one promotion's favor. But I think Al's Inc. had better TV coverage, which hurt the Cormiers, and the Cormiers actually had better workers, better talent, but they couldn't draw without TV, and within like 3 months, they had lost everything, all the money they had saved from so many years, and then the equity, from running from so many years, that it was all gone, in this promotional war. So,
was Leo Burke ever the booker for Stampede or the Maritimes?
Yeah, he was. I think he was the booker for his own promotion. I think they all kind of took turns with that. I think Leo, he was probably the best worker, and he probably ran the dressing room a lot. I think all the Cormiers were part of that as a family, but I think Leo was the most experienced and worked in the most territory. So, and I think he was booker for Emile Dupre for a number of years as well. He's just someone who's relied on the most, had the best ideas, the best finishes. And he was the booker for Stampede 1977, 1978 for 1 year. And that time, my dad's promotion was really struggling. We had hit a really low period. We didn't have really good talent at the time, and our gates had really dropped. We were just drawing terribly. And then Leo actually had left the Maritimes after that promotional war with Al's Inc. And he came to my dad, and said, I want to work for Stampede, and I think I've got some good ideas, and give me the opportunity to be your booker. And at that time, my dad didn't really have anybody. My brother Keith had done it a little bit before that, but he had gone on to school teaching and firefighting. So my dad was actually looking for somebody, and an experienced wrestler. I think my dad kind of wanted to take that position out of his son's hands, because it put a lot of pressure on his kids and him if business was failing and the gates weren't good and the wrestlers weren't happy, if Stu's kids were running it. So my dad, offered the position to Leo, and Leo did just a great job. Like he had business up, in 4 or 5 weeks, and just everything he did was so logical. He thought of the undercard guys, and how to keep them up and down. So nobody was a total jobber, and really just how to get guys over, how to build heels up for the top baby face or vice versa, and very unselfish in that role as well. But we just did great business. I mean, obviously Leo was putting himself over on top, but he was over. He was the most established baby face at the time. So I think there's nothing unselfish about him being the top guy and working programs with all the heels, and and we did great business here. He was selling out with guys like Don Gagne and Michel Martel, Ricky Martel's older brother, and so many others. So our business really came up after Leo had been a booker for a year, and the other factor too is when Dynamite Kid came in the spring of 1978, and he just got over incredibly. It's just sort of the injection that the promotion needed, and sort of that transition from the heavier, slower moving guys to the faster light heavyweights. And so I attributed the turnaround in my dad's business to Leo's booking to a large extent, and how well Dynamite got over.
What would have been the two best times for your dad in the promotion's history as far as the two biggest boom periods?
We had some really big ones. I think before I started going to the matches, I started going when I was about 6 years old, but I know my dad had some really good business in the mid to late 50s, I think with the Miller brothers and the Mills brothers, Alan Tiny and Sky High Lee and Rube Wright, some of them. I think he was doing really good business from the early to late 50s. And then, there's kind of ups and downs over the years. Business was really poor at times, then other times it was great. But from my period, I guess, I think business was really good. 1973, we had the Stomper and Abdullah the Butcher, both as our top heels, and they were working individual programs. I think Archie was working a big program with Dan Crawford, and Abdullah was working with Tor Kamada and Carlos Belafonte, Carlos Colon, and we had really good business, for the winter of 1973. And then that period, I think in 1982, with the double cross by Foley's Army on Dr. D, David Schultz, and he tag teamed with Leo, and they worked against Duke Myers and Kerry Brown for about 2 months straight. We just had incredible business. We were just selling out everywhere, week after week after week. And then it culminated in a cage match finally between the two teams. And I remember that was really good business there as well. But there are different periods, in the late 60s, Archie Goldie was a really big drawing card for us. In the early 70s, Abdullah was a big drawing card. And then Dan Crawford had a lot of success with some of these innovative matches like ladder matches and, cage matches, and so we did a lot of really good business there as well. And then we had a really good run with Dynamite and Davey Boy and Brett, and Leo. We just had such a great crew. It was probably one of the best crews I think we ever had in the early 80s. When we had Dynamite and Davey, who were working against each other at that time. Brett and Leo, Duke Myers, Kerry Brown, David Schultz, Mr. Hito, and we had really good business, for about a 2-year period there.
One thing I didn't know when I interviewed Greg Valentine the other day, he said he was there when Billy Graham actually came. He was there the same week that Billy Graham debuted. Do you remember?
Yeah, Billy had, been here for a few months. I know we told the story, Devin, about when he met Dr. Jerry Graham, and they had the big handshake in the dressing room. Billy powered Jerry down, and Jerry had to go down on his knees because Billy Graham had crushed his hand. It was the same night that Dr. Jerry had shit all over all the chairs in the dressing room in Calgary. He'd come to the matches. He was completely drunk, and he had messed his pants, and it was sort of par for the course for Jerry. It's how he came into a lot of the dressing rooms, quite often not even wrestling on the show or even appearing in the ring, but he would just come in and be kind of belligerent and sound off in the dressing rooms. But Billy had been there for about 4 months, maybe. He was tag teaming with Angelo Mosca, and then Greg, who came in, he was sent to Calgary by his dad, Johnny Valentine, came in, I think, about April. So about 3 months after Superstar Billy had broken in. And I don't think Greg had even had one match. He came in and started for my dad, in Calgary. But I remember the funny thing my dad said about Greg's, I think Johnny wanted my dad to, stretch him and toughen him up. But he said when he met Greg, he said he had so many boils on his skin, on his back. I don't know if it was just bad skin or what. My dad was really hesitant. Said, I don't really want to wrestle him because if I'm wrestling him on the dirty mat and he's got all these boils, all over his back, is that going to transfer to me? So I kind of remembered that interesting anecdote, about Greg Valentine when he came in and worked for my dad.
Very interesting. Another guy that talked. I didn't interview him, but Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker. Do you remember anything about him working for your dad?
But he came in. I think he came in to Stampede very briefly, about 1989, and he was only here a couple of weeks. He came in with some other guy that they named James Earl Wright. So my brother Bruce was great at coming up with these names, quite often takeoffs from real killers or criminals, right? You had Cal the Animal Manson, right? You can kind of figure out whose name that was close to. And then James Earl Wright, okay, and whose name that was. But so there's Buddy Lee Parker and James Earl Wright. And I can't remember that we kind of brought them in as sort of a military heel tag team. It's almost kind of, I wouldn't say an Aryan Nations team, but they're kind of like a redneck heel team. But they didn't last long. They came a couple of weeks, and that was about it. But at the time, Stampede was kind of struggling, and they didn't last too long. They're only here a couple of weeks. But interestingly, Buddy, though, and I don't know what his real name was. He kept the name, and then he was using it in Japan and in the South. He kept the name Buddy Lee Parker, even though he only had it for a couple of weeks with Stampede. But I think they turned into pretty decent workers. Just a shame they didn't stay longer in Stampede.
Yeah, I was surprised when I heard him tell that story because I didn't recall it, but that explains why. This is a question I could answer, but I'll let you answer it. How did you guys do drills in the dungeon since there was no ropes?
Yeah, well, we kind of just improvised, because we had walls, with the dungeon. I don't know how many people actually were in there. You were there, Devin, if you remember. There were 3 walls, basically 3 sides, and then the other side is just where we sat and watched, right? So there's basically only 3 walls there, and we just kind of had to improvise, and it was a smaller ring, it was only maybe a surface for about 14 feet maybe, but it just allowed us to teach more about basics, how to fall, how to lock up, but we had a very low ceiling, if you remember, and not much clearance. So, it wasn't easy to do things like suplexes, like standing suplexes, or even body slams, because guys' feet would go through the ceilings. And then for the ropes, we just had to kind of improvise. We did rope drills, but you had to just kind of bounce off
the wall.
Yeah. And so, eventually when the weather was nice, we were able to set up the ring outside. We had a full ring, right? Like a 20-foot ring with turnbuckles and the ropes. But everyone seemed to adapt, and learn pretty well for years and years, and it kind of forced wrestlers to learn more about ground wrestling, right? Mat wrestling before they're trying to do all the high spots and coming off the top ropes.
The one good thing about learning to bump down there is I never complained about any ring being stiff because I found if you could learn how to bump down there, you'd know how to bump on any surface.
Yeah, it was stiff, right? There wasn't much padding there. I've wrestled on harder surfaces. I've wrestled on some rings, even in England, that had no give whatsoever. There's absolutely no padding. It was just sort of a wrestling mat and maybe not even an inch of carpet or something underneath, right? And hard as hell to take slams and bumps on. But Dungeon was pretty hard, right? And it just kind of forced you to protect yourself and know properly how to fall, use your hands to break your fall and keep your feet close to your butt, and land flat on your feet, tuck your chin in, and Bruce especially really taught the importance of landing carefully, and once you learned that from the beginning, it was a good habit, and you never really regressed from it, and even though it was a hard surface, you were still landing properly. So, there wasn't as much wear and tear, on your back or your shoulders, but it was a hard surface for sure.
And I think every practice, at least in my era, started with everybody gave everybody a series of hip tosses, head mares,
Yeah, arm drags,
body slams.
yeah, and just repetition, right? One thing after another was really good for your cardio. It was really good for your, your technique, and your format. And and Bruce would just call different things, right? He'd call like a head mare, then he would call a Beal, then a hip toss, right? Snap suplex, and you had to be ready, for whatever he called. And just that repetition that made guys better performers.
What I always found funny is when he would have the people, if they were new, sometimes give a speech on why they wanted to train and what their expectations were. And they would have all these grandiose things to say, and then they would do a couple drills and they would leave and never be seen again.
Yeah, I think Bruce kind of did it for amusement. He said, okay, we'll just go up there and tell everybody, what your goals, your aspirations are. And, and these guys quite often didn't know what to say, but they thought, well, we better just make it sound really good and say, I want to be the next world champion, or I want to be the next Hulk Hogan or something. And the more experienced wrestlers would kind of grin and roll their eyes and snicker a little bit, but yeah. And a lot of those guys, who had pretty unrealistic aspirations, unfortunately didn't last very long, right? It was hard work, and you had to be competitive and keep up with the pack, right? And those who didn't last very long.
One thing I liked about the way you guys train people is, like, you cut out the people that to me shouldn't be in the wrestling business. Like, you cut out the people that weren't really tough just by the way you trained. They just wouldn't have made it through. You didn't have it easy on wrestlers like some schools do. Like, I also trained with Jacques Rougeau, and I'm not taking anything away from him, but he trained so easily that you could be a kid and do his training. But you guys wanted the wrestlers to have to prove that they kind of deserve to be wrestlers.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity that they had to earn. It wasn't fair if you gave it to them before they were ready, because obviously they wouldn't be up to the task, and they would flop in the ring. And it wasn't fair to the older established guys, to take some young upstart, and give them a higher push. But, you have to kind of balance that with different success levels, and some guys that were just naturals and picked it up really quickly, you had to let them rise, quicker than others, right? But I think on our promotion, you kind of earned your spot on the show. There was no politics or anything, and if you were used well, it was because you were trained well, and you earned the opportunity, and you were a good performer, and you were safe in the ring, and you had consistently good matches with everybody.
And just to ask, this is a bit of a random question, but anyone that was a fan or part of it during my era would remember Anna. Whatever happened to her? She wasn't bad, but it seemed like she had her year and a half, 2 years with you guys, and then
Yeah, I know she was from the Vancouver area, and I remember initially I think she was sort of a valet for Carnage, for big Elvis De Silva. Um, and then we did get her in some matches. She was wrestling with Natalia and Belle Lovitz and I think Ma Myers, and she was looking great. I thought she had a lot of potential. Her mechanics were pretty good in the ring. I think the problem for Anna was she wasn't comfortable with the sexual aspects of wrestling. When I kind of subtly told her, if you ever go to the WWE or WCW, you're going to have to wear, a bikini or something more revealing. And she was not very comfortable with that. She said, I don't feel comfortable with that. And I said, well, unfortunately, that's what they're looking for and what most promoters are seeking, and that's unfortunate because she was actually a very beautiful girl, and she had good height. And I don't think she was willing to make that adjustment. I think she just thought it was too sleazy, too unbecoming for her, and I kind of wondered, well, what was your reason for going into wrestling, if you weren't willing to, sell your body? But I think for her, she really enjoyed the training and the conditioning for it, and especially when she got the chance to work out with other girls, she really blended well, especially with Natalia and Belle Lovitz, or I think Jamie Henwood was her name. I don't know whatever happened to her. She was a good performer as well. I think she made it as far as the WWE Developmental in Ohio, and then something happened with Belle down in the States. But as far as I know, though, Anna just kind of returned to Vancouver, and then I think she was working as a valet on some of the independent shows there, and then kind of dropped out of sight. But I had a lot of regard for her, and I thought she was quite talented as a performer in the ring.
Yeah, since I wrestled Carnage so many times, I worked with her, but I always thought she was almost too classy for wrestling. It seemed like an odd fit because her parents were rich or something
Yeah,
too, right? So
I know when she was in Calgary, her parents paid for her rent. Like she was staying in a very high-end apartment or condo in Kensington that was probably $700-800 a month back then. Like now it'd probably be closer to $2,000 a month, with the high inflation there is in Calgary and Edmonton. But she was staying in a very nice area, and her parents were accommodating her. They were kind of subsidizing her. So, but yeah, and it's, we see that sometimes some performers definitely have the look and the potential, but they kind of make that professional decision to walk away from it, for different reasons. Maybe it's the lifestyle, maybe it's the injuries, and for some it's not quite what they first thought it was going to be, and that's, kind of unfortunate. But you understand and respect everybody's decision to walk away from a career decision, no matter what they've put into it or invested in it. It's a hard decision to make, but sometimes it's what they think is going to be best for them. And I think that was sort of the case with her and a few others that gave up on wrestling pretty quick.
She's probably a doctor somewhere now. Greg says it's nice to see you reflecting back on a time when I was a big wrestling fan in my youth. Stampede Wrestling was one of my favorite programs at the time.
Oh, that's great. Well, I appreciate hearing that. We put on the show every week on TV, and we had some great characters, and it brought back a lot of memories. And it's amazing like how much old Stampede Wrestling I still see on YouTube, right? Matches I haven't even seen in quite a few years, right? That somehow maybe were missed in the archives or something, because we did try to tape most of the shows, but now and then I'll see something on YouTube that's really vintage, from the late 70s or something that somebody must have recorded on a beta cam or something. And it's pretty neat to see that. Some of the old interviews, the classic ones with Ed Whalen and the Stomper and guys like that, Tiger Tommaso. But
you actually were the videographer for Stampede Wrestling for a period of time, right?
Yeah, from about 1980 right to about 88, 89. And it was a pretty interesting experience. I can't say I was really qualified for it. I'd never, gone to school and learned anything about editing. I just kind of looked at it from the promotions perspective and say, what do we need to feature on TV? We had a 60-minute show, actually 48 minutes with TV commercials. And we had to condense all the highlights and interviews, into a 1-hour show. And we really only had 3-4 hours to do it. When the show was finished on a Friday night, we had to edit it and have it ready to air the next day in Calgary. So it kind of lacked production values in some ways. We certainly couldn't compete years later with, the WWE and, they had multi-camera angles and, better lighting, but I'd say our matches, and our storylines, could compete with them anytime. But it was great. At the time, the audiences were less critical about production values. We put on a pretty entertaining TV show.
Yeah, 100%. And I really appreciate you taking the time tonight to answer my questions. It's always great talking to you. Fans can follow you on Facebook, right? If they want to look
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't respond right away, but I'll try to confirm requests as much as possible. But I love hearing from fans, who grew up with my family, or with the Stampede promotion. Just so many great memories. So yeah, you can follow me on Facebook or what was formerly Twitter, I guess, and Instagram as well.
Ross Hart something on Twitter, right? There's a number after it, I believe.
I think so. I can't even remember it, but I'm on Twitter for sure, and Instagram and Facebook for sure. So yeah.
Where's your next vacation?
Well, I'm going to Cauliflower Alley at the end of August. So that'll be for about 5 days. So I'm looking forward to that. I think Kurt Angle and Sting are getting honored this year, and the Dudley boys. So I had to miss it last year because it conflicted with my school schedule. But I'm going there at the end of August, and then I'll be in school, after that. And then next summer, I'm planning a really big vacation, probably to the Far East, like maybe Taiwan and Vietnam, if it's safe to travel over to those places, then if they're not being invaded by the Chinese or something. But it's kind of a crazy world out there. But usually, every summer I go on some kind of exotic or overseas trip. But this summer was a little more low key, just with a nice drive to the West Coast, and then going to CAC in August.
And just the quick Cole's Note answer to this question, you were talking about Bruce Allen earlier that ran Vancouver very successfully. Why did that stop? What put an end to it?
What brought an end to it was when my dad had sold the promotion to WWE. They bought the promotion from my dad in August 1984. It was just when Vince was starting his expansion and his war, basically, with the Mid-Atlantic and the AWA. And we were drawing incredibly in Vancouver. Bruce Allen had just done an incredible job of raising our profile. We were getting better radio and TV coverage, and we were associated with celebrities like Bryan Adams and Tom Cochran, some of these singers, who were under contract to Bruce Allen, and they would actually come to our shows, as sort of special guests. But he really did just a tremendous job of promoting our shows, and we were drawing incredibly, in Vancouver and Victoria, and we were in a really good position there. But unfortunately, in Calgary and Edmonton, our promotion had really caved in. It had bottomed out after Ed Whalen had quit the show. This angle that they did with the Stomper and Bad News Allen, and the Boxing and Wrestling Commission suspended my dad's license and closed my dad's promotion. And when Ed Whalen resigned and walked off the show, saying that wrestling had become too violent and too distasteful. And it was really just because the angle had gotten over so well with the Stomper and Bad News Allen. But, and the commission then suspended Bad News because he had hit a fan in the crowd, and the place had kind of rioted, had gone nuts, and the Stomper, went berserk, after his son Jeff, had been pile driven by Kerry Brown and Bad News Allen. Anyway, it was a major angle. It just got so much publicity, but unfortunately, Ed Whalen quit the show, and then the commission suspended my dad's license. Our business went down for the next 6 months, and it was really unfortunate, and my dad had just become so weary of losing money then in 6 months, and this replacement they brought in for Ed, he was Sam Menaker, who had been an experienced announcer in Indianapolis and even Australia, and he'd actually hosted my dad's show in the late 50s, early 60s. But when we brought him back in 1983, he just sounded terrible. He was old. He couldn't remember the wrestlers' names. And, and his speech was really slow and repetitive, and he couldn't keep up with the moves of the action. And I think all those factors kind of killed the TV show and our drawing power, in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Yet in Vancouver, we were on fire, and I think those were the key decisions my dad made to, sell a promotion. And I don't think he really wanted to compete with Vince McMahon, and he saw how well Vince was doing, when he acquired Hulk Hogan. And I think my dad saw the opportunity for some of his best stars like Brett and Dynamite and Davey Boy, Jim Neidhart to wrestle for WWF and get that exposure. So he sold the promotion to WWF, and that kind of ended the partnership with Bruce Allen, which was unfortunate because if that hadn't happened, maybe we could have risen above, and I don't know if we could have only recovered after what had happened in Calgary and Edmonton, but it was kind of a domino effect, when the commission censored our wrestling so much and the media backlashed the promotion, and Bad News Allen was described as out of control, and and he was going too far. Like he was using a fork in the ring and bloodying up guys and fighting outside the ring, and often wasn't doing what he was told in the ring. And he had drawn so much negative publicity, from the media and from the Boxing and Wrestling Commission, but they overzealously, though, suspended my dad's license as a result, and it just kind of killed our promotion, and I don't think Stampede ever really recovered from that, even when we opened back up in the mid 80s with Owen and Chris Benoit and Brian Pillman and kind of a new wave of stars. It never fully healed or recovered, from that period in late 1983. So, it's kind of a tragic chapter really for the Stampede promotion and my dad, but there is undeniably, though, so much potential in the partnership with Bruce Allen. And maybe if he could have launched Vancouver and the West Coast so successfully, he might have been able to do the same thing here, given a period of time. But unfortunately, my dad made the decision to sell the promotion to the WWE. And that's another story in itself because, Vince never paid my dad what he was supposed to. He was supposed to pay him, I think, $1 million for the rights to the promotion, the TV rights. They basically got the TV slots that Stampede Wrestling was on and got all of my dad's rings and really just the empire, because we had a huge promotion that ran all the way from Vancouver to, Winnipeg, and parts of Montana. So, so by them kind of taking over from the Stampede promotion, we had already established really good wrestling here. And then, he took our best stars, right? He took the Bulldogs, he took Brett and Jim. And then years later, he would take Honky Tonk Man, Bad News Allen, Owen, and others. So, but, they they never honored their agreement. You know, they only paid my dad, I think, like $50,000 for initial down payment for the sale of the promotion, and nothing after that. You know, so in a sense, we got screwed in different ways. You know, on the sale of the promotion.
Did you ever consider just maybe giving Calgary and Edmonton a break and just basing everything out of Vancouver for a while until it blew over with the commission and everything?
We could have. I don't know how we would have done television though. Like if you didn't have TV coverage, it was pretty impossible to run, and we didn't really have any contacts, you know, in Vancouver, you know, to establish TV tapings there, you know. But it would have been an idea or an option. But I think just for a lot of the fans, they loved Ed Whalen at that time, and Ed was really hard to replace. And unfortunately, the one we replaced him with was kind of a dinosaur, right? He was so old and lethargic, and you know, and was kind of the exact opposite of Ed Whalen. You know, like he was dry, didn't have a sense of humor, and was really just out of touch with wrestling. You know, and I think for my dad that was kind of humiliating because, you know, the success he once had with Sam Menaker, like in 1959, 1960. You know, I think he thought he could duplicate, you know, 25 years later. But sadly, that wasn't the case, you know. So I think every wrestler, announcer, performer has their lifespan, you know, and obviously Sam Menaker wasn't the right person, you know, for that role, you know, and pretty tough act to follow too, you know, with Ed Whalen. But you know, if we'd had someone though who was just a little more energetic and a little more colorful, you know, it certainly would have made a difference, you know. But unfortunately, it was someone who's the opposite of that, and like, you know, our TV audience has just plummeted, right? And the quality of the show was really bad because, you know, he was announcing and doing everything. He was doing all the commentating and the announcing, and everything just came across as very stale and you know, just there's no interest, no pizzazz there, you know. And there was, you know, the opposite of what was happening with Vancouver, where people were so into the angles that we were doing there, you know. And again, and we had kind of a complete separate identity, you know. We were so hot on the West Coast, you know, and again, that was largely because, you know, we had some really good talent, but Bruce Allen was really promoting it well, you know, using local celebrities and sponsors, and just getting us really good coverage on radio spots and TV spots, you know. And so you know, and it was so interesting how we were struggling so much, you know, in Alberta, especially in Calgary and Edmonton, after the fallout from Ed Whalen's resignation and the censorships of the Edmonton and Calgary commissions. And yet Vancouver, we were on fire. You know, we were really hot. I remember we'd done an angle where Tiger Williams, who had played for the Maple Leafs, was refereeing a match, and I think with Ron Starr and Bruce, and then it ended up with Tiger Williams stepping in the ring, you know, as a wrestler. And I think he tag teamed with Bruce against Ron Starr and the Great Gamma, and it just got over like crazy because he had played previously, I think, for the Canucks. I think, in fact, the Canucks had maybe traded him to Toronto or something, but he was so popular as an NHL enforcer and a tough guy. And then when all of a sudden he's in this ring and he's fighting these wrestlers, you know, it just got over like crazy. And you know, I think we were in the Coliseum where the Canucks used to play at that time. We had over 10,000 fans there. It was just incredible how big wrestling was at that time, you know. And then it was all over. You know, my dad kind of secretly sold the rights to the whole territory and promotion out to WWF, and that was it, you know. And you know, we never could establish that partnership after. I think Bruce Allen was so disappointed and upset, you know, with how that happened, that, you know, he wasn't interested in doing anything years later, even when my dad restarted the promotion. And we did try running Vancouver, and and we couldn't do it without him, unfortunately. And he had, I guess, kind of lost interest in wrestling at that point. And, it just seemed for a couple of years, though, we had a huge following on the West Coast, and we were so much better than All Star or any of the outlaw independent promotions there. But after that wave of success in '84, and then promotion just kind of shut down abruptly. That was it. We could never duplicate that again on the West Coast. So yeah.
This is a good question. Did Ed not know that it was a work, or was it just so over the top with what Bad News was doing that he just thought this is not what pro wrestling should be? I'm out of here.
Ed knew it was work, but he was very sensitive to some angles and issues. He was very sensitive about blood. Ed didn't like blood on television, especially if it was baby faces, who got split open, by a foreign object or something. Ed was very uncomfortable with blood, and he was very uncomfortable with certain heels, and he didn't mesh well with Bad News Allen. Allen was a little too over the top, came across as a kind of a black racist. I'm not saying he was, but that's how he came across, very anti-white, and he was at times very disrespectful with Ed in interviews. Ed kind of had his way in a lot of interviews with heels. I think he was careful not to do it with someone like David Schultz or the Stomper, but Bad News decided to kind of put him in his place a few times, and would physically grab the mic away from Ed and say basically just shut up, Big Bird, and listen to while I'm talking. And Ed felt really intimidated by that, and he was very uncomfortable doing interviews with Bad News. And you could just sort of sense there was bad chemistry between them. Allen thought he was kind of a smart aleck announcer that wasn't respecting him, and putting him over as a heel enough. And Ed felt very intimidated by Allen, and with all pressure from the commission, because they had suspended Allen 2 or 3 times for fighting outside the ring, for altercations with fans, and just not keeping safe boundaries, basically, going too far, like using a fork in the ring, brawling into the crowd. And when that happens, you're just inviting trouble. If a spectator gets hit by a wrestler, even though the wrestler maybe is defending themselves, the wrestler's going to be blamed. Or if it's sort of a spillover effect where there's brawling in the crowd, and then there's a stampede and all the fans are fleeing, and then somebody trips and falls, breaks their ankles, or gets injured because of the panic and chaos, the promotion is going to be held liable. And that was happening quite often with Allen, who just had too much heat. And when this angle was done, Ed was kind of aware, what we were doing, but he just fed too much into it. He just said, this is bad for the TV's image. It's bad for my image, and I have to walk away from it. And he made that decision. I'm quitting the show, and he just left. There's no negotiating with him. There was no reconciliation with Ed, and he didn't come back for a couple of years. And he set some pretty strong guidelines with my dad, about less blood, less violence, and he didn't want to be associated with anything that was too over the top. So, but Ed, yeah, it's funny. Even though he knew what was going on, sometimes he overreacted, and maybe was thinking more about his image and the station's image than what was getting over with fans, right? And I guess there had to be kind of a happy medium there. And with Ed, though, he was very conscious, though, of how the show reflected on his image, because he was a sportscaster first and foremost, and he was a commentator for the Calgary Flames, and he didn't want any negative association with something like wrestling that had become too violent or distasteful.
That's pretty amazing that you had the Calgary Flames announcer announcing wrestling.
Yeah, he was wrestling long before he ever did the hockey commentating, but I think it became very important to him. The being an analyst for the Flames, You know, it was kind of a prized position for him because the Global TV had the rights to the Flames telecasts then, long before there was TSN or Sportsnet or anything like that. And Ed coveted that role. You know, he knew there was a lot of other sportscasters, you know, that wanted that position, you know, to be an announcer. And, you know, he didn't want to give that up whatsoever. And that became kind of a priority, you know, for him, you know, to host the Flames games. And that was kind of tough for us because some Friday nights when there was a Flames game, he would be out of town, you know, and, you know, contractually, I guess that's what he had to do because, you know, he was an announcer for them. And yet I think, you know, Ed was very realistic when he said that my dad always paid him more. He made more money announcing with my dad than he did for the Flames telecast. So my dad always paid him very well. And, you know, when he was part of the show, he was a big drawing card as well. So, but, you know, Ed though was very protective of his image. And when things he thought were too strong or out of hand, you know, he would just make that decision to kind of walk away from it. And he did that a few times. And it was tough because there was really nobody else to replace him. You know, we didn't have other announcers. It was sort of different than other territories where they often had independent announcers that didn't work for the TV station that were doing the color commentating. For us here, it was Ed Will, and, you know, with Global TV. And, you know, it was tough. We weren't in that position to kind of just put a wrestler in that slot. I think the fans were so accustomed to Ed, and he was a popular figure on the show, you know, with his announcing and his humor, I guess. And, you know, even though he really wasn't knowledgeable about wrestling, he didn't know a lot of the holds or anything, but he could really keep up with the action. And the way he reacted, it was very much a babyface reaction when he saw the baby faces getting screwed and the heels getting away with cheating. You know, he would react like that, you know, and he was really the eyes and ears of the fans. I think that's what made him so appealing to the show, but it also, you know, became kind of a weapon against us, you know, when he just got up and left the show and quit, you know, and put us in a position where we couldn't really replace him.
What was his cause of death ultimately?
Heart attack. Kind of interesting, Hannibal. He died 1 month after he spoke. I think it was 1 month after my mom's service. When my mom passed away in 2001, Ed gave a really lovely speech at her service. And then I think 1 month exactly after her service, he was at a nightclub in Florida. He was on a vacation there, I think, with Naomi, his wife, and he collapsed on the dance floor, you know, and had a heart attack, and he died. I think he had some heart problems before, and I believe he had a pacemaker, but he was still very active. He was still doing sports casting for Global TV here, and you know, and I don't think he was that old. I think he was maybe 73, 74 when he passed. I could be off, but yeah, you know, you know, and it was kind of ironic. Like a month after he had spoken at my mom's funeral, you know, he collapsed and passed away in Florida at a nightclub while he was on vacation. But I guess that's not the worst way to go.
No, definitely not. And I do remember I was in Stampede at that time. You did do a 10 bells salute to him, but I was thinking to myself, he couldn't have been that old at that time. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans. I really appreciate your time and sharing of all your knowledge.
Yeah, I think just support all the local independent promotions. There's a lot of good talent on those shows. The Dungeon promotion has had some really great shows in Calgary. I'm hoping they'll expand and run other cities, you know, besides Calgary. But there's other independent promotions as well in Calgary and Edmonton, Vancouver. I think there's a new promotion there, and a couple of good promotions in Saskatoon and Regina. A lot of good independents. So I think it's just important to support those shows and those stars, and you know, the feedback and responses you give to them can really help them achieve their goals. And I've seen such good talent. I won't highlight any specific names, but I can definitely say some of the best talent in North America is right here in Western Canada. And a lot of these guys that I've seen performing on shows could easily fit the bill on AEW or WWE or New Japan, if they get those opportunities. So I think it's important for the fans to support those independent shows and give those wrestlers that feedback and the opportunity to perform and practice their craft.